This is the All-Star Networking Show with your host, Kathy Paper.
Welcome, Sara Taylor, to the All-Star Networking Show. All-Star Networking Show, that's a tongue twister. Super excited to have you here. Why don't you introduce yourself to the listeners and then we'll dive right in.
Fabulous. Yes. Thank you for having me, Kathy. I'm so excited too, especially since we've known each other for so long. I feel like just chatting with an old friend here. So I have actually been a diversity, equity, and inclusion practitioner for 35 years now. And not something that you would expect. What your listeners don't know just by my voice is that I'm a white woman. And so it's not something you would expect a white woman to be a DEI practitioner. But I have actually, since middle school, been giving speeches and presentations about bias and stereotypes. I think back to that now, and it makes me giggle, those presentations and speeches that I would give for competitions back when I was in middle school. But have all of my career been really invested in making organizations more equitable and inclusive, and the individuals within them more culturally competent and inclusive. In my career, I started off as a diversity specialist. Then I was a chief diversity officer for Ramsey County, those folks that are Minnesota listeners, and then started Deep Sea Consulting, the organization that I still run today. Started it 22 years ago. And our mission is still the same: to change the world through the workplace. And again, we do that by developing individuals and organizations.
No, excellent, excellent. So I love the, Ramsey County reference to and 22 years that you've been doing that work of changing the world through the workplace.
Yeah, absolutely. And just so many, what's wonderful about being an external consultant is that you get to work in so many different organizations. And, we're called practitioners for a reason. We really are practicing this field and continuing to evolve and better the work that we're doing. And so it has just been such a gift to me to be able to practice essentially in so many organizations and learn from individuals, learn with them, and continue to refine tools that help people to understand what exactly they can do to be more equitable, to be more effective, to be more inclusive, and for organizations to be more equitable and inclusive.
Okay, so I am going to pause on that one because before we got on the podcast and started talking, I said to you, I feel clunky with some of my diversity conversations and actions, and I love that word, culturally competent. And I'm going to just hold up, for you and I's sake, and people can find this. You've got a new book coming out, Thinking at the Speed of Bias, and what I like about it already, I can tell, is you've always been really actionable.
Mm-hmm.
And we're going to talk about your work and working with people, but explain more maybe about what does being culturally competent actually mean?
Yeah. Yeah, well, first of all, there are 5 actual stages of competence in some models. My model has 6 stages. And in those early stages, we are 100% controlled by our unconscious filters. Our unconscious filters make decisions for us and take in exponentially more information than we can ever be aware of. In fact, let me get at that with I want the listeners to just think for a minute. How many pieces of information do you think our brains are capable of taking in just 1 second? What would be your guess, Kathy?
How many pieces of information can we
Yep,
take in?
in just 1 second. It's
Prob-
lots.
Probably like 20.
Actually, 11 million.
What?
11 million. That's how many. And they're going straight to our unconscious filters. You said 20. That's actually close to how many we're conscious of. We're conscious of 40. So that means 10,999,960 pieces of information are stored in our unconscious filters.
Wait a minute. You
And
gotta
then they,
say that number. You gotta say that number again. Because I don't know if anybody, the listeners, when your minds are
10, yeah,
blown, did you
10
say
million,
10 million?
999,960 pieces of information every single second that we aren't conscious of. So that can be information that we don't consciously agree with. I might take in stereotypes about me as a woman that I shouldn't be in the workplace. I might take in stereotypes about my family. I have a mixed race family. My husband is Afro Latino. I might take in stereotypes that say we shouldn't be together. All things that I don't consciously agree
Right.
with, but it's stored there in my unconscious. And then it's my unconscious filters that decide my thoughts, which decide my actions. So when we're operating in those first three lesser effective stages, our unconscious filters are completely in control, doing whatever they want to do. And it's not unless and until we move to those latter three stages of development that we're able to utilize what I call the active conscious process, a process of checking and challenging our unconscious filters as they send up information to our conscious mind. Is this true? Do I really want to believe this? How am I going to act on this? And not just allowing our unconscious filters to just decide for us and create our actions. So it's in those latter stages that I'm able to see how my unconscious filters are creating my beliefs, my preferences, my thoughts about the people around me, and then also my actions. And then when I can check and challenge that, and I can understand better the filters of others as well, then I'm able to match my high level of positive intent with a high level of effective impact. So that's really what cultural competence is about. It's not about, oh, do I kiss, bow, or shake hands, when I'm traveling? No, it is much, much, much more than that because it's that deep understanding of how our unconscious is working.
All right. So I have a lot of questions, and this is a model, again, these 6 stages are amazing, and people following that, they can, find more of the model and
Mhm.
understand that. Because again, my
Mhm.
head is sort of pulsing, thinking about a lot of these words, filters and positive intent. And what you said is, what exactly can people do,
Yes.
and so let's just take me, the beginner,
Yep.
the beginner who's somewhere, sometimes I think I'm unconscious and then sometimes I'm conscious, obviously.
Yeah.
That's my goal. And I like the word positive intent because I like to think I'm a good person or a
Absolutely.
compassionate person or whatever. So where does somebody begin when they're in a workplace and they want to start working with somebody, or we want to network with somebody that maybe doesn't look like us or isn't like me? I'm also a white woman. How do I start? How do I get
Yeah.
myself a little bit better up the ladder?
Yeah. Let's
Is that
talk
too easy
about
a
that.
question? Is that too easy a question for you?
No, no, not at all. It's a good question. It's a great question. It's a question I think that a lot of people ask because in my opinion, and I have asked this in probably in front of tens of thousands of people now, and everybody agrees. Like, but do you have positive intent when you go into the workplace and into your interactions? Everybody says yes. I mean, seriously, who says no? I really want to be an ogre today. Like, I want to be a jerk, right? No, we have positive intent. So then why do we have misunderstandings and conflict? It is because we're not able to match that positive intent with the equally positive impact. So it's yes, we want to be good people, but how and effective and inclusive people, but how do we do it? So let's think of that process. I call it the passive conscious or the active conscious process. So if we think about this, well, I'll get at it again with a question. Can you tell me right now what your next thought is going to be? You can't, can you?
No.
None of us can. And we know that from brain researcher Benjamin Libet. Why? Because that thought is created by our unconscious filters milliseconds before it passes it to our conscious mind. And then it's that conscious thought that creates our actions. So, what do we tend to do? We focus on actions. Well, that person did this, they did that, and then we jump automatically to a conclusion. They're rude, they're obnoxious, they're unprofessional, they're this, that, or other. What that really is our filter judging their action. And we're not also clear about how our own filters create our actions. And so if you think about that process, our unconscious filters create our conscious thoughts, which then in turn create our visible actions and behaviors. Think about those three steps, if you will. In any given interaction, there's one that could be missing, and it's the conscious thought. Our filters are so strong that they can, boom, just create an action for us, whether that's a rote behavior or just an automatic. I mean, I show up in a meeting and I automatically do small talk. It's just what I do. I don't think about it. I don't say, gee, should I do small talk? Should I not do small talk? It's just what I do. It's what's natural to me, right? I just do it. So our filters can actually create our actions. That's the passive conscious process. That's where bias can seep in because we're not consciously checking what's coming from our unconscious filters. So, what we need to do is institute that active conscious process where consciously we stop and we say, okay, what was that just came up from my filters? What is that belief? What is that judgment about the other person? And we challenge it. Is that real? Is that true? How am I going to interact? So, it's that process that allows us to sift out the bias information from the unbiased information, and then in turn create the effective versus the ineffective behavior, or the inclusive versus the exclusive behavior. So when you talk about, I'm in these interactions, don't know what to do. I think I'm doing what I need to do, but I don't know. That's kind of the start of that active conscious process. Like I'm aware that I might have some kind of bias, but I don't know what to do with it. So I'm kind of like going back and forth and not really sure what I'm not real confident about what I should say. Um, Not real confident about what I should do. And so the good news about that is you're really starting to use that active conscious process. Now, what can happen though is we can look like a deer in the headlights in the interaction then, because we're like, okay, what am I supposed to do? Am I supposed to do this? Am I not supposed to do that? Because you're doing that active conscious check.
Well, and okay, so let's talk about that for a minute or connect the dots to networking and or
Mhm.
building relationships because I
Yep.
know you're an all-star networker and have great connections and great relationship building skills. I know sometimes, especially after the pandemic, I still get nervous when I'm meeting new people, right?
Yeah.
So what you said of the deer in the headlights, I feel like when I'm building relationships, not only sometimes am I nervous, but then I'm like, well, wait, what if I say the wrong thing? Or
Mhm.
what if I
Mhm.
don't want to offend somebody or any thoughts on, you use the word actions. And I will say this from being, reading your book and I love like there's a little tip-in card and you explain
Yes.
everything and there's great visuals in here.
Yep.
Um, and charts is how do I get my actions or sort of what you call them, those active thoughts, so that I'm not the deer in the headlights that's so obvious that like, I mean,
Yes.
I worry I'm going to start to perspire or
Yes. Yes, it really is practice. It's practice. And what I always say is practice outside of high risk situations. So don't practice when it's a networking situation with a lot of consequence. You want to practice in real low risk situations. And the other reason why is because you are doing that process. You're doing okay, the order is see self, see others, see approach. So I need to see my own filters. How do I approach this situation? Even what are my preferences for how to connect? What are my misgivings about networking? Where do I feel uncomfortable? How does that show up? Really getting to know how my filters and my beliefs about networking are going to impact my behavior in the situation. And then putting myself in the situation of others. So, how do others experience networking? And particularly if I'm thinking about, I want to network in across significant differences. Well, how do groups very different from me, how do they view networking? What is authentic for them? What is sincere connecting for them? And really understanding that before I then potentially shift my behavior to match more of their preferences.
How do I find out how other people network? This is a new concept, I think, in all our podcasts of how do I find out how other people how they network?
Yeah.
How do I do that?
Yeah. You can look to group patterns and group preferences. So, this is something that is very culturally based, and um, which ties then to group norms of different cultures.
Mhm.
So, cultures that are more group oriented are going to network through that group, through their already existing network. Like, give you an example. My husband Miguel is from the Dominican Republic and does a lot of work there still, and has his own business, versus my business here in the United States. So I have family members, even. I have a sister that is president of a healthcare organization, a number of hospitals. Um, in the US, I don't go to her and say, hey, would love to work with you, want to work with you, and expect that she's going to give me work just because we are connected, right? In
Mhm.
the Dominican Republic, that would be an expectation. So my husband can go to his family, his close friends, and say, hey, I want to work. And the expectation would be, yeah, of course, I'm going to give you work. So even just that piece is very, very different. There's also how we communicate. Some cultures are very, very emotionally expressive, and you'll see the emotions that they're feeling in that interaction. And so for them, if they're really excited, and this is me, I fall in that category of being emotionally
Me,
expressive.
me too.
And so
Yeah.
when I see you, I say, "Oh my gosh, Kathy, it's so great to see you." And my hands are in the air, my voice is going up and down. I'm like, hey, you hear it, you see it, you see my eyebrows raised, you see the happiness, the emotion in me. So when they are interacting then with someone who is emotionally restrained, who doesn't show any emotion and says, Kathy, I'm really excited to see you. What they feel and take in is insincerity. So even understanding that, if I'm interacting with someone who is emotionally restrained, versus emotionally expressive, if I match that, it's going to feel more comfortable to them. And that's part of the networking process, right?
Mhm.
Is is really being able to connect with others in the ways that they want to connect as well.
Okay, so that is such a great point, Sarah. And again, for me too, what you just described is so authentically, I'm more emotionally expressive, right? But if I'm going to meet with somebody who, conscious or unconscious, right? They're just more subdued, or sometimes I'll say, well, they're more reserved. I I adapt a little bit,
If
or
you're able to see that without judgment, if you're able to see emotionally restrained as an equally valid behavior without saying, oh my gosh, they're just so dead. They're just so, right? And you can authentically exhibit that, then absolutely. And that then also comes back to the practice with the cashier at Target, you
right.
know, practice with very low risk situations.
I like that. I love that idea actually of thinking about, and this will help my cultural competency, right? Because I would like
Mm-hmm.
to get a little bit more competent. I think I do okay, but to be very intentional,
Yes.
what you map out is
Yes.
to be very intentional. I find myself doing it when somebody I can tell, I usually say, and I don't think I'm judgmental, but I notice they're a little more buttoned up,
Yeah.
is
Mm-hmm.
sort of the word I use. They're a little more buttoned up or
Mm-hmm.
more formal than I am. Um, and I like that way of how you've explained that of finding and labeling it either preference or the filters.
Mm-hmm.
Those are really helpful ways for thinking about uh,
Absolutely.
So
Yeah.
so let's go back to the workplace again. We could talk for a really long time about building these relationships and that cultural competency in the workplace. Uh, how do you help people build a network that is more diverse? Are you
Yeah.
doing big projects and workshops? Or are you coaching them individually? Tell me a little bit maybe of how is your book going to be a tool inside organizations?
Yeah, yeah. So a couple of different things. First of all, the tool is it really gives the roadmap for both individuals and organizations to be able to check and challenge their filters. Just like individuals have filters, organizations have filters that show up through their policies, through their practices, through the unwritten norms of the culture. So it is that essentially that same process, but adapted to organizations where we really take a look at how are we a filter driven organization and how does that then create advantage for some and disadvantage for others, inclusion for some and exclusion for others. So working through and really if we think about those 6 stages again. Unfortunately, the vast majority of individuals are in the third stage, which is the ineffective stage, almost 70% of folks. So, what we do in organizations is develop organizations by developing the individuals within it. So, we move that apex of a bell curve from that middle stage to the higher effective stages. And then we have more people in the organization that are able to really utilize that active conscious process and utilize that as they evaluate their policies, their practices. We also have a tool, it's in one of the latter chapters of the book, and that is an equity framework. That once someone has developed their cultural competence, they and a group in the organization can use it to review policies, to review decisions, to make sure that they are more equitable. It's essentially an active conscious process for a group as they're making decisions. So that's very much how we can move organizations.
Okay, so on a smaller scale, let me see if this example is right.
Mhm.
As you were talking, I was having a flashback to, oops, there's our timer. That was disturbing. Um, when I worked at Best Buy and was a young mother, and a leader of a team, one of the things that used to happen was leadership would call a 7 o'clock meeting.
Yeah.
And to me, as a mom trying to get my kids out the door to daycare and to do whatever, I thought, do any of these, let's say guys, right? Do they have to take their kids? Like, who calls a 7 o'clock meeting?
Yeah. Right.
When we do that. So would that be an example of like either an unwritten policy or a
Yeah.
culture norm that, like, to me, I was
Yeah.
like, I can't do this.
Yes. Yes. And it is then very much a filter driven organization, a filter driven behavior. And can become the norm. Well, of course, we have 7 o'clock meetings. Oh, we don't have time on our schedule tomorrow. Okay, then let's do the 7 o'clock meeting. It just becomes of course, we do that without thinking about the consequences for other people. And lots of times, what ends up happening is there are a lot of people that are impacted negatively, but no one says anything because it's those unwritten rules.
Unwritten rules. Well, actually, so what did happen, and I applaud Best Buy for early on, we formed then was the Women's Employee Resource Group and started to talk about some of these things, and it was slow going, but I know they've made progress. But so what you just said of sort of speaking up about the policies or working with you. So,
Yeah.
oh, there's so much here, Sara.
There is, which is why folks need to buy the book. And, let me say something else too to encourage folks to buy the book and review it. We are going to be donating to 3 different charities for every review that we get in the month of July. Actually, it's a full month, so it launches on July 9th. So until August 9th for that month, we're donating for every single review on Amazon and Goodreads. We're donating $10 to 3 different charities. One is Second Harvest, which is a Twin Cities organization. Another is the Mariposa Foundation, which is a foundation down in the Dominican Republic for educating girls. And the third is the Innocence Project that really is getting at systemic injustice. So just encouraging folks with your review, and if you're able to review in that time frame, know that you're giving to a fabulous organization.
Good. Okay, I love that. So thinking at the speed of bias, how to shift our unconscious filters, available on Amazon, Barnes and Noble,
Yeah,
everywhere,
anywhere. Absolutely
anywhere.
anywhere you get your books.
And Sara, I love this. We work together. You're the best-selling author of Filter Shift, and so
Yes.
far I'm loving this. Also, you should say this: you're a certified B Corporation.
Absolutely. Yep. Absolutely. Women-owned business. Absolutely. WeBank certification. Yep.
Great, great. Well, thank you so much for being a guest today on the show. And we'll have all sorts of information in the show notes for people to get connected and to hurry up and read and do your review. You're going to learn so much because my goal is to graduate from, let's say I'm somewhere 2 or 3 and move up the model so that I am more
Yay.
culturally competent. So
Yeah,
thank you so much for your time.
you are so welcome. And thank you so much for having me.
Thanks for listening to the All-Star Networking Show with Kathy Paper. If you're interested in being a guest, please contact Kathy at www.rockpaperstar.com.